Hey, welcome back, everybody. Mike Dokter here, coach of the high school house basketball team with the Michigan Basketball Academy. We are reading through Pound the Stone by Joshua Medcalf, the sequel to Chop Wood, Carry Water. Thank you again for joining. If you're part of the team, thank you for watching. If you're not part of the team, thank you for watching. If you're interested in what we're talking about, the other content, got all the chapters out here. Take a look at the playlists and get through Chop Wood, Carry Water. If you haven't read that or haven't listened to that, I have that whole book recorded. Absolutely fantastic book by Joshua Medcalf. Great dude, great author, great mentor. Really worth diving into his stuff. So today we're going to read chapters 17 and 18 and give some thoughts on it. So chapter 17, A Wealth of Wisdom. All afternoon, Jason couldn't stop thinking about what Jan had said. He thought he was really taking this seriously, but after talking to her, he wasn't sure. She was right. He wouldn't hire himself for a $250,000 a year job. Honestly, he might not even hire himself for a $25,000 a year job. He knew he needed to start investing in himself and taking himself seriously. Halfway through the afternoon, he stopped off at a restaurant for a cold drink. As he took a break, he looked through the books in his backpack. Just like practice, he had always hated reading. He avoided it if he could, always using Cliff's Notes or looking up the summary online. But it seemed that this time he couldn't avoid it, so he decided to start with the first book, The Slight Edge. It started out easily enough, and the more often he read it, the more interested he got. He tried not to focus on the fact that reading the book was like talking to Russ. At certain points, it felt like Russ might have been a ghostwriter for the book. By the time Jason looked up from the book to check his phone, he couldn't believe it. He'd been sitting there for 2 hours. That had never happened before. And it wasn't just because he knew this would help his sales. He had to admit he really actually liked the book. It made a lot of sense to him. And he had heard of compound interest before, but he never realized that it worked for everything in life, not just savings accounts. It made a lot of sense for basketball. He knew a lot of the best players built their game on doing really boring things really well. Things like that, the book said, were easy to do, but easier not to do. Things like layups or free throws. Sometimes those fundamentals really did make the difference between a win and a loss. Jason left the restaurant buzzing with energy and curiosity. That night, after helping Jan with the dishes, he sat out on the porch next to Russ and kept reading. Russ just grinned, proud. For the rest of the week, Jason couldn't stop. He burned through each book on the list, devouring them like a starving person at a buffet. Each had fascinating stories with timeless wisdom, and he filled a whole notebook of notes while reading. By the end of the week, he felt like his brain was just a burst into flames. It was full of so much new information. Now he just had to put it to use. We have tremendous amounts of information at our fingertips as we have smartphones now. It's a heck of a lot easier to be able to understand the timeless wisdom that people have put together and organized for us. I enjoy reading personally. Not everybody does. I grew up not really liking it, but did it. I didn't hate it. I always read because, again, we didn't have smartphones or other things to entertain us a little bit easier. But the reason I'm recording these videos is simply because I know that reading can be a challenge sometimes. It's an extraordinarily important thing to be able to do. Helps your brain grow, helps you gather new information, helps you retain it in a different way than just listening to it or seeing it. So it is important to be able to go through that. But what I'd encourage you to do is that if you are looking for some sort of wisdom, find some source that can help you and dive into that, devour that. It will make you better. I read personal development books, but I also read a lot of novels. I love reading novels because novels, quite honestly, are sometimes packed with that timeless wisdom too. Authors are brilliant, disciplined people. To write multiple hundreds of pages and tie a storyline together is a really difficult thing to do. I've taken my hand at attempting to write a book before. It did not work. And it was really just sort of a book that was transcribed of other podcasts that I had done. So was something that should have been that simple. It didn't turn out as well as I had hoped. However, I have nothing but respect for people who do that. So get involved with people and dive into that content because it can be very valuable. And it helps yourself grow. All right, chapter 18, Grit. Grit, go Lions. All right, chapter 18, Grit. Cut it off. Jason closed his eyes as he pointed to the barber's scissors at his mohawk. It was time he took himself seriously, and the mohawk wasn't helping, so it had to go. Later on that night, Russ smiled as Jason got home. "Looking good. What made you decide to change hairstyles?" Jason shot a look at Jan, and he laughed as Russ declared, "I thought so. Let me guess. She gave you the You Inc. speech. How did you know?" "Hey, do you think you were the first one she used that on?" Russ shook his head and laughed. "I have to admit, I think it worked. I actually wanted to ask you, Russ, would it be okay if I borrow a nice shirt or two for work? I think it might help me look a little more professional than this." He nodded to his baggy basketball shorts and the t-shirt covered in loud graphics. "Of course. Come on." Lucky for Jason, Russ had plenty of old clothes, and he and Jason were roughly the same size. He gave Jason a half a dozen shirts and 2 pairs of slacks to try on. Jason was surprised by how stylish and fitted everything was. Certainly felt strange for a street sweeper to have. But he didn't complain. Jan was right. Even if he didn't quite recognize himself, he definitely looked more professional. That night, he cut his practice short to write out a new pitch for each book he had read, including personal stories about what he learned from each. It was hard, but he remembered the principle of the slight edge. Easy to do, easier not to do, and kept going. He even practiced each pitch a little bit before bed. It felt silly, but as he finished, he felt more confident than ever. But by lunch the next day, he was ready to give up. He didn't sell a single book. All the extra effort seemed to be for nothing, and he felt like a total failure. Still, he knew that quitting was no longer an option. He wasn't playing with one eye on the scoreboard anymore. Before knocking on each door, he reminded himself, find common ground and focus on what you can give, not what you can get. And sure enough, at his last stop of the day, it finally happened. After they finished the conversation, the man he was talking to smiled and said, "Sounds great, I'm in." Jason walked away with a spring in his step. He had finally broken his losing streak. But by the end of the week, that spring was gone and doubt had set in. He was quiet and angry every time he made it back to the house. He didn't say anything at all the way through dinner either. It was the first time he had refused to answer Jan's patented 4 nightly questions. What are you grateful for? What was the best failure you had today? What did you do well? If you could do today over again, what would you do differently? He went to bed that night exhausted and woke up to the smell of coffee and bacon. Jan was cooking up breakfast in the kitchen, putting together the ingredients to a big dish. "Could you help me with the peppers, Jason?" "Nice and small, please." She handed him a knife and he got to work. As he did, she asked him, "So this week was a tough one?" He nodded. "Yes, ma'am. I sold 1 book per day this week. That's it." Jan just smiled. "You know, Jason, that might not seem like much, but a wise man once said, 1 is greater than 0. In fact, one long-term research project published by Harvard found that the greatest predictor of future success in life is the ability to delay gratification. The word I like to use to describe that ability is one my friend Angela uses: grit. She calls it the passion and endurance to keep working towards one's mission despite setbacks and failures. And especially good for you, she found, that those who experienced more setbacks and failure on their journey but persisted anyway often ended up better because of it. Jason snorted unconvinced, but Jan pressed on. "Let me ask you a quick question, Jason. Has basketball come pretty naturally to you, or have you had to move from failure to failure without losing enthusiasm?" Jason took a deep breath as he thought about it. "Before this summer, everything came really naturally to me, but it feels like all that is gone now." "Awesome. I'm so glad to hear that," Jan said with too much joy for Jason's liking. "Why would you say something like that?" Jason couldn't hide his disdain. "Oh, I'll tell you why, Jason. Because even though we have an obsession with naturals and talent in our society, those people always end up worse off in the long run if they never learn to develop grit. We get distracted and enamored by people who seem to have the it factor instead of putting the dirty hard work in to develop what really determines whether you fulfill your potential in life: grit. The only way you can truly develop grit is by experiencing failures and setbacks. Quite frankly, the fact that you are learning and now in a safe environment with people like Russ and I that are going to keep encouraging you and supporting you to persevere is much better than experiencing it once you get to college or to the pros. Wouldn't you rather experience it now and start developing your grit muscles? I've heard some college and pro coaches can be quite tough. Yeah, I guess so. It just sucks. Failing sucks. It sure does. But guess what? The person who has mastered their craft has failed many times more than the beginner has ever tried. The path to mastery will never be easier or without repeated setbacks and failures. Jason nodded as he finished up the breakfast dish, mixing the chopped peppers. It looked heavenly and it smelled better. Jan saw his hungry eyes and smiled. Take this dish, for example. You could make it faster, cheaper, or even buy it frozen and prepare it in the microwave. Or you could do what I did. Master making it on your own from the very best ingredients, even if you fail the first few hundred times. There's no such thing as microwavable mastery. Greatness comes just like a good meal, with time, patience, and love. And if you don't believe me, take a bite of this. Jason was more than happy to oblige, and Jan was right. The dish was amazing. All right, grit. Failure. Failure sucks, guys. It absolutely sucks. I got a bit choked up there, and I will before this book is over. I promise you, just like in the last book, I will cry when I'm reading you these chapters. But failure is quite honestly one of the hardest things for us to wrap our heads around, it being a good thing. And it's extraordinarily difficult. And it's one of the reasons why practice is so important. And you notice in the book that Jason was practicing his pitches before he went out and actually did them live. One of the things that I tell all the players that practice on a regular basis, and if you're a player and you're watching this, you know that you've heard me say this before, but would you rather fail here in practice or out on the court in front of everybody watching you? Would you rather fail here with me where we can work on it and make it better? Or would you rather fail in front of the scouts who are looking at you to see how well you can do things? And quite honestly, kind of the answer is both, and I'll tell you why. First of all, we want to fail in practice. We want to screw it up as soon as we possibly can, because the sooner we screw up, the sooner we neurologically can figure out what we need to do to get better at it. We only learn through failure. We only learn through screwing something up. Our brains only process things through seeing, hearing, smelling, tasting, and whatever else, sensing all of the mistakes, and then we adapt to make it better. We are created as amazing beings. And we have the ability to be able to get better consistently over and over and over again. And if we do that, and if we consistently put in the effort to practice and get better and fail as soon as possible and fail forward, we're in a much better spot than not. I had a great mentor always say that failure is feedback, and I truly believe that. Failure is feedback. It's feedback to understand what it is that we need to do differently to get better so we don't fail the next time. So if you're going through something, don't expect to get it right. Hope that you screw it up. Hope that you screw it up as soon as humanly possible. Hope that you screw it up in a safe place with people who can help you get better. That's exactly what you want to do. Now, the reason that I'd say that it doesn't suck to fail in front of people who are judging you, engaging you, is because oftentimes those people are much smarter than we are. That's why they're there, right? They're there evaluating us. And especially in basketball, when you screw up and when you fail, people are watching to see how you respond. How do you react? Do you let it affect your game? Do you let it affect what the next play is going to be like? Do you get super discouraged and hang your head and forget to run back on defense if you miss a layup or a shot? Next play. Focus on the next play. You failed. You screwed up. Big whoop. Who cares? Who cares? Who flippin' cares? It does not matter. Take it as feedback. Take it as an opportunity to learn and grow. Run back. Do better next time. Run back. Do better next time. There's absolutely nothing you can do once the shot leaves your hand. Nothing you can do. Once that shot leaves your hand, it's over. It's out of your control. There's nothing, right? Once you get beat on defense, the only thing you can do is hustle back to attempt to try harder. Once you miss that shot, the only thing you can do is focus on that next play. Focus on what's next. Don't focus on what's happened in the past. Focus on what you can do better to get that back, right? That is what I think is incredibly important about this, is that persistence and consistency to keep going no matter what. Don't worry about screwing up. Don't worry about screwing up, right? When Thomas Edison invented the light bulb or stole it from Nikola Tesla, whatever you want to believe on that story, he failed over 20,000 times beforehand. And when somebody asked him if he got discouraged, he said, no, why would I? I figured out 20,000 ways not to make a light bulb. So if you're failing and you're screwing up on a consistent basis, don't get discouraged. All you're doing is understanding ways not to do it. It's that simple. It really is that simple, and it really can be that simple. So screw up often, screw up in a safe environment, screw up in practice hard, practice with an attitude of growth. Keep that growth mindset, take that ownership, move on to the next play. All right, we'll see you next time, guys. Bye now.